up? This is um, a new video I'm coming with, and I wanted to just upload a couple ideas that I had because I've been having some cool developments in my life. There are also a lot of challenges, and one way you know that you're really making progress at anything you do, whether it's drawing pictures, whether it's singing songs, whether it's holding down a certain job, whether it's holding down a thankless job that pays little but it still pays, or whether it's doing something that doesn't get paid at all. Anything, anytime you're drawing, anytime you're making progress, that is momentum. If you take one step forward, that's initiative. That's difficult. If you take two steps forward consecutively, you further the first step with more initiative. Both the first step and the second step are continuing degrees of momentum. The initiative in the first place will be checked to go from inert to active. You must overcome resistance to do that much, and that would be doubt, comfort, fear, habit, complacency, success, social pressures, peer pressures, professional pressures, uh, national pressures, political pressures, religious pressures, um, pressure that you put on yourself, the pressure to succeed before trying. All those things are different degrees of percussion, percussive force, repercussions. You could probably say repercussions. Those would be actually you have pre-concussive, co-concussive, and which is concussive, and post-concussive, and they're in different light to heavy, maybe random percussion, repercussions that all brace things because this existence is perfectly calibrated, harmonized, and balanced. But that balance, like the yin yang emblem, it can amount to both light and darkness, and in the umpteenth degree of light and darkness that cannot be uttered by men, and it cannot be preconceived, and even conceived while being experienced in our normal state, such that there is no progress, but also there is no even failing and or floundering and or regressing without also percussion, because those are different. Any motion, anyhow, forward and stationary and backwards and transcendent, and probably descendant, all have percussion, and they're all abrasive, traumatic, painful, suffering, but they amount to light and glory and testimony and experience. But there is the one word. There's very few things that there's very few words that I'm afraid to level. When I used to go to church, they would talk about babies in the word, babies in the walk. A lot of times people, even like right now, a train is going by. Sometimes you'll be on a train and you'll hear people that are at different degrees of their walk as a men, all human beings require faith because it takes faith to exist on earth, because life is arduous. A baby must have faith. For a baby, sometimes you don't appreciate how much courage it is to be a baby. You're confounded. You're presented. Think about how much is it going on in experience. You're 40 years old and you take a trip somewhere to the Bahamas, and even for an ordinary person, it is difficult to understand and even experiencing itself. Experience is not easy at any point in life. Whether you're familiar with your day to day, in and day out, the drudgery, just how long have you been living? How difficult is that first step? How taxing is the commute? How taxing are your coworkers? How taxing are your financial peers? How taxing are your financial pressures, which benefit others and yourself differently, maybe equitably, likely not in the modern iteration. There's nothing easy about experiencing is simply baffling. However, for a child, for an infant, it's all brand new, and an infant has nothing to grasp. When you scale a mountain, you have ostensibly the grooves, the eccentricities of the rocks that are almost inevitable, fateful, predetermined, destined, that the rock will be formed like that it'll be positioned like that it'll be existing like that. As some would say, before the foundations of the earth, our destinies were known. You may say that we are able to choose our destiny. However, the legging, the footwork, the footholds, the ground, the terrain, the dynamics, the advantages, the deprivations, the dangers, the pitfalls, the shortcomings of an environment are predetermined, can be understood. A lot of hill faces, a lot of rock faces have been existing that way for eons. If a person shall walk into a particular venue, the actual advantages, disadvantages, opportunities, and also are a little bit faded in destiny. Our improvisation, and our approach is unique unto ourselves because we're conscious sentient beings. That means we feel and we have the propensity to choose. The real one of our the dignity of a human being is to choose and to be creative, but creative is also in understanding. Probably creative is in perceiving. I will be one to say that creativity is in perceiving more than understanding and even intending. Because say you are an artist, as you're an artist drawing a picture. My brother is a brilliant artist, a brilliant art. Quite, my it's actually I can't actually speak about my brother's art without being humbled by it, by his approach to it, by his solemn result. But when my brother draws pictures, he's meticulous, painstaking in detail, and I would imagine that his own creativity, his own shading and drawings and sketches present advantages and challenges. My brother himself, he draws profound pictures. One way you know that you're getting on somewhere is that you know where your difficulty lies. You know some of your shortcomings and your strong suits. And no two people can draw a picture the same way. No two people can play an instrument the same way. And thereby, there are realms within an instrument, within a craft, that are uncharted to a particular artist and may be daunting, difficult, and I don't want to say anything's impossible. But my brother himself, as profound as an artist he is, he knows that some artists can do things that he hasn't worked up to that level yet, and he's very tentative. My brother, it's interesting. My brother was I was appreciating today that my brother he was born assertive. One of his gifts in this life is that he was assertive since pre-K, since pre-toddler, as a toddler, near about as an infant. Even as an infant, his gaze, he wasn't he was probably profound. He was probably baffled by this existence, as all of us have been. And you're born different times in this life. Some of us, like the first time you would experience substances, like say, I don't want to call alcohol a substance, alcohol or like an entheogen. Alcohol is a man-made um is a man-made drug. I think alcohol is a lot of a drug. Not that, because a lot of people wouldn't know that alcohol. There are different forms of alcohol. There are many different forms of alcohol. Many different substances can be used as an intoxicant that be akin to and will draw and will be perceived on a chemical level as alcohol, but they are different alcohols. For example, rum, like your whole pirate's life is life for me. Rum, like just your rum is made out of sugar, molasses. That I would imagine that's one of the older forms of alcohol because it's since the time of pirates, but it's not necessarily. I don't know it's likely not known what is the first alcohol. That probably cannot be determined what is the first alcohol because I would imagine that it would be conceived by humans at different places. Some things about the human mind are inevitable and you're about destined for humans to stumble upon. And one thing that Arthur Avalon said is that many different faiths, like for example, the Maya people, the Maya of Mexico, they had certain insights into the human body that overlapped with that of the Indians from India, and the Indians would develop things like the chakra. I think what we appropriate and we refer to as chakras, according to the works of Arthur Avalon in some of his works, the serpent power, which refers to Kundalini, and some of the blessings and the propensities and the abilities that occur to a human being by the, that are fathomed by it, and therefore a human being is possessed of once their body has undergone some of the blessings and the harmony that's achieved in certain development, such as yoga proper as a discipline and or real life. For example, I was at a venue and I was doing exercises. I had to request an accommodation to do exercise in a stationary position without interfering with people because some of the staff had not seen that before. And where I'm at it's a heavily controlled environment. If anyone's been to, it's interesting. California is home of rock and roll, but California is one of the most stifling environments in terms of authority. There is so much authority in California. In California, you may not be at any place at any time without being allotted and afforded to be there. But also, California has some deep history to it. If you're in any environment and you're not aware of the history of that environment, you are simply ignorant, and it is simply a matter of time until you make blunders there that can be very costly, up to the penalty of life and death. But California, so too, has a deep history of brilliance, but also of warring. The native peoples of the entire Americas were completely formidable. I can't conceive of any nation of people on earth, not the least of which the different tribes indigenous to the Native America, to the Americas, that are not awesome and formidable in terms of fighting and warring when things come to that, because that's just what is called upon about the rigors of human life. We're daunted by rigors of the environment, but also human beings, which are part of the environment and as challenging as any part of the environment, because human beings are intelligent. So human beings are intelligent opposition at times, but that challenge and conflict makes life brilliant, beautiful, and also viable and robust. But California, for instance, has the history of the native people. Then you have the conquistadors, who are warring people and also formidable. And then you also have a lot of military activity in America since probably the founding of California, I'd imagine, because California is a port. So California has always had a lot of significance in terms of shipping in goods and services, and also exporting war. So California is a war port, and so all of the wars, I would imagine, to at least the all the wars from at least the First World War, California was a staging ground for training and also exporting military force to some of the different theaters, a war area, and actually an entire war zone, not only a war zone, but a war campaign. The broad campaign itself, and also the region that it takes place in, is called a theater. So World War II, for example, had a Pacific theater, the Western theater, and it also had several Eastern theaters, that being Europe, also Italy, which is technically, I think, Europe at that point was deemed Europe, but Italy overlaps with the Roman Empire, I think, and Italy was a unique, almost camp theater unto it. So World War II had at least four theaters for the Americas. The Americans had the Pacific theater. I think that broadly refers to Japan, but maybe some of the Pacific region. Then there was Europe, such as Germany and France, particularly heavy, horrible, horrifying, horrific experiences in the human condition that took place there. Also, Italy, which was its own theater, and Italy was maybe a staging ground and a mediary point between Africa. There's also the African theater, but I imagine that the exporting of force, both artillery in terms of equipment, ammunition, but also human personnel that would sacrifice their lives at time. May they all rest in peace. May all men of any side of that war, any war of any kind, rest in peace and honor and valor. However, uh, um, World War II had at least four theaters that I can conceive of, unique theaters. The France, Germany, also France, Germany, being Europe, not limited to those two, but that's where a lot of the awesome fighting took place. Russia, which I don't think America participated in much of the Russian front, but that front was still significant. And I don't know if that would be considered a different theater in itself, because those were different nations that concentrated there. But also, something World War II had four theaters at least: Africa, Italy, Europe, and which maybe Europe, Italy is transcendent of those African and Eastern Front, and then also Europe and the Pacific theater. One Pacific, two Europe, three Italy, four Africa. But the only reason I mention that is because all of those would have received likely the personnel and the artillery, as in the equipment, um, the battlements and the ammunition, and also the resources and the reinforcements and the supplies would have, I imagine, would have went by way of California, a lot of that. So California is a staging ground. So that actual military history and function of California, it plays into the history and the current culture of California, because one thing about war, similar to business, is that war has unfolding, cascading, rippling after effects and aftermath that war itself sends people here on after, and the effects of war, they do not stop with that war. So we're still deeply embedded in the cycles of all the wars upon earth, not the least of which some of the awesome campaigns in the 20th century, including World War II, such that California and America too, because California is an engine of culture. America itself, according to Dr. Umar Johnson, is an engine of culture the world over. It's completely influential and awesome in terms of making culture because some of America is so diverse in terms of the talent and the ethnicities and the histories of the people in terms of regions in the United States, and then they're intermingling, which is beyond. I don't think a human can really speak to that, how profound that is. But the aftermath, the externalities, the eventualities is what the settled fates and what will be settled fates from that calculus and trajectory. They never stop redoubling and confounding and transpiring. And also, these wars have consequences beyond hereafter because many people have met their eventuality in this world, their fate, and their exiting of this life, at least to a human conception, creates a void because power abhors the vacuum, but so too does living. So when one, so like a wave, the oceans are balanced, but I would imagine the light there, it is appreciated by when people refer to psychology as yes, this one is bipolar, this one is this and that. When we have armchair psychology, that's the most superficial psychology that a lot of people who have a brief, superficial, and terse um, uh, command of psychology from not having looked into it and not having undertaken risks and rigors to go into it deeply would not be familiar with some of the deeper solemn properties. But actually, psychology it overlaps with what's called magic, and that's how it was understood by the proponents of what we have for Western psychology. I'm referring to Carl Jung and Freud in particular, and as one of the chief proponents and progenitors and grandfathers of modern psychology, and then also some of his understudies and prodigies, no less than Carl Jung, but not only Carl Jung, but some of his also some of his actual his other understudies and proteges, both male and female, and also some of his very family were among those according to Alex Jones. And they not only landed and influenced psychology, but they also influenced propaganda and media creation, and would be deeply embedded in both the history of Hollywood, the military, which overlap, and also uh, um, psychology as it's leveled and as it has real professional and economic and impact on human beings currently in terms of livelihood and social status and standing, which amounts to opportunities for living and dying and suffering on earth. But on the deeper tiers of it, the deeper rungs of it, as you were to appreciate and just look into any of the published works of Carl Jung and/or Freud, which I doubt many people who reference psychology superficial and overlay it onto friends and family and associates and strangers. It actually has properties. It overlaps with what's called magic and also alchemy, but such as that it's appreciated that there are things as a life and death current of life, and some of that can be perceived like, for example, when a man achieves an erection, the actual like I remember one time I was at a venue called Job Corps, and there was a beautiful woman that spent time with me. At that time I had access to my mother's vehicle, and I was also a non-residential student there, so I had a little bit of standing and status based on the fact that I had access and control of a vehicle. I didn't own the vehicle outright, but my mom let me do with it as I chose during the day because she was at work and didn't need it during the daytime. So I was able to take myself to school with it and sometimes work with it. But one time a girl asked me for a ride, and a male who I also helped with rides because I wasn't stingy and I wasn't courting people in directly per se by communicating them in vehicles in on terms of dates, but I would help anyone who had a need because I have a lot of miles under my belt as both driving a personal vehicle, but also driving professionally for delivery work and also CDL. But before that, I long had rides like to church, and I was humbled by some of the different times people would the charity of different people. So I helped people with rides, and this boy from Milwaukee, the young man from Milwaukee, he saw this girl ask me for a ride, and I agreed to give her a ride. And at that moment, there was a silence that came between me, her, and him. There's a brief current that you could feel in the air, and he said, "Oh, you see that? He just got a boner right there." That's the I at that time I there actually was a somewhat of a kinetic, which you could call sexual energy, because that was one of my first time giving a ride to a woman. But what that is that he actually sensed the life and death current right there, and that's enough to give a person an erection. But that life, if you think about what turns a person on enough to achieve an erection, which is part of the which is part of life and is necessary to conceive life, the thoughts that you would have in having an erection, some of them are dark, morbid, fateful, tragic, and also kinky and deprecating, and also relishing and egotistical, and that all amount that's similar akin to death. But that life and death current is that's part of the actual underpinning and principles of what we have for psychology, what we have for art and media, especially media in the first place, because most art actually checks in with media if it's economically viable, and because for art to be viable, also content creation like what I'm doing, and also business too for that matter, even things like science, it has to tap into a current and serve a greater purpose. Otherwise, it's not going to be as tractable as a lot of people would like to win with those type of things. But those underpinnings, and I would imagine that cadre that infiltrated Hollywood and America and was useful in propaganda, but also media creation, content creation for digitalism, like with the camera. It plays into and it borrows from alchemy, and it would refer to life and death. But all I meant to say is that life and death is balanced like the ocean. So that life and death current, you can give life may go on one. So as one is born, one leaves. One leaves. One is born. Not like there's that song, "Don't Fear the Reaper." Certain people die each day. Like Romeo and Juliet. About in that song, "Don't Fear the Reaper," a brilliant song. Actually, I'm gonna put that in my playlist. Now I thought about that. It refers to the fact that life is a current, and as this many people exit each day, ostensibly many people come back in. I sometimes think that when you see a beautiful sunset, like say on a weekend or something like that, I actually think that those are actually souls getting ready to incarnate because what is spirit? According to tantric based spirit refers to breath. When you refer to spirit, you're referring to breath. Soul is not necessarily the same. I think soul is actually transcendent and deeper than spirit in itself, because spirit is a little bit more changing, ephemeral, even dare I say superficial, but also so subtle and wasteless as to be immortal. But the soul, most things have a static and a kinetic component. According to Arthur Avalon, there's no motion, there's no kinetic. With you have potential energy and kinetic energy. Kinetic potential would be like the static well reservoir, which kinetic energy is drawn from. That's energy, pure energy. But then in terms of physical activity and motion, motility, both of human body, biological, I'm sorry, organic, living carbon processes that substantiate carbon-based life forms and the activity, the ceaseless. This universe is in ceaseless motion, but so too are organic beings, even things that they're dormant and things that are dormant and hibernating. They're still said to be viable on some level, because how may they come back? Not necessarily active, but but so potent as to. It's actually on the finest level. I wonder how a scientist would appreciate what is truly potential energy and what is kinetic. According to Arthur Avalon, there's nothing entirely conscious or unconscious or subconscious. All consciousness is a combination of conscious, unconscious meaning self-aware, unconscious meaning unself-aware but still aware enough to be conscious, and then some threshold that's subconscious, and probably both consciousness. So you could probably say like rock paper scissors. They're imminent within the other. According to Arthur Avalon, for any letter to be viable and possible, also any sound based on letters, all the other letters are imminent within whatever is expressed. There are other sounds and or letters that are potential within that. Otherwise, it would have no meaning. So for me to be happy, there has to be the potential for me to be angry, and otherwise. So you could probably say that consciousness, unconsciousness, and subconsciousness as to sound, as in the platform of sound, the consonants, and the expressed sound, the beautiful sound, the force of sound being vowels. They're imminent within the other, where one's expressed, the other's latent. But so too probably consciousness, unconsciousness, and subconscious are with the other, and to different degrees latent and expressed, such that probably nothing is entirely inert and or active, but something has to be more so inert for something to be more so active. But it's a balancing, and so life and death are like a current like that. That and that's impacted by the things we do, not the least of which warring and fighting and dying. And also, an example of that is they say that in World War II, many souls were lost, many people were lost, but also with that, a lot of masculinity was produced. Men of that this called the greatest generation, the generation that went to World War II. My grandma's generation, born like after World War I, was called the greatest generation. The one that were burdened with World War II conscription, and they were awesome people. I remember my grandma was also having come through. A lot of them were forged. That people, that cadre on the American side that were in World War II, they were shaped and grew up under depression, the Great Depression, either the reality of that and or the threat of that, which are both daunting and traumatic. But they were that tough and they came through that. But having come through both being raised in the Great Depression and then fought World War II, when they come back from that, they were a lot of men. They were awesome. They're virile. They're violent. They're disciplined. They were attractive, but also the production of World War II. We never actually lost the production of World War II, and in different ways we're replicating that. We never ceased the lifestyles and the surplus that came with that, but also the attitudes and the pretensions and the proclivities such that we're locked into mass production. And I think that some of our preoccupation with AI it's inherited from that, in that we must produce more and more ceaseless production, such that no man, woman, and child on earth, at least that's impacted and touched by Western culture and economic activity, is spared the actual what amounts to a rat race, but it is actually a race to production that never ceased since at least the time of World War II, when it was geared up to a high ratchet degree. But I'm not saying it started with World War II, but it was ratcheted up and it never came down. But we also have potential of that, because you may say, hey man, this is 2026, man. You're about to graduate high school, man. You're born in 2008. You're about to be graduating high school in 2026. Hey, what are you gonna do with your life? Well, Timmy is thinking about joining the Navy, so Timmy's gonna go off and join the Navy fleet. What army? I'm not saying that the Navy is not necessarily viable, but we're not finding World War II the same way. We still actually operate like have notions about a Navy as though we were in World War II, and I think that's because we were never actually able to stop World War II in our production and in our minds. We still replicate that, and some of our warring activities actually reenacting where it's not always necessary the actual lifestyles and the actual tactics and viability of World War II, and I think that we pay for that, but it's also economically viable, and it's part of us living up to that and prompting and inciting fighting to make that necessary is part of making the production necessary, which we're akin to and we enjoy. But even children are not outside of the demands of that, because by the time children are very small, they have to adjust for it, but sometimes surmount actual work duties. They have to go to kindergarten, which can be work, or preschool, which can be work, and even if they're in that or not, they're still within they're still within the scope of the competition of that. So if they are getting away from that and they're getting spared that, their peers may not be, and they will have to come up against their peer, and they'll have painful experiences against their peers, both at the early stages, latter stages, and adulthood, based on that actual competition, which already started by the time they're near about infants, how well they're able to learn letters and such forth, math and such forth, based on the parents' education and lifestyles and choices of profession and such. But so these actual ripples and these actual fallout of things like businesses and war fighting and stuff like that, they can't be controlled, and they, according to Chris Hedges, and they go on and on. And so in California, you can see that as a case in point in some of the culture, the fierceness, the toughness of California, but also, but I want to say some of the etiquette and some of the dressing of California, because California gives us a lot of our dressing etiquette. I imagine they say that California is it's influential not only in terms of Hollywood, but also street culture and a lot of the country over. Some of the formalities about dressing, like say with gang activity, some of the gang activity in the country over, it comes from California. But if you look at the history of California, there was fighting in some of the areas where military members were stationed, say in World War II, World War One. They would be stationed in California, and they'd also be partying in California, living in California, and they'd be coming into contention with the actual local population in California. And people of any background are not to be outdone by other people, not whether they have the same means and not, such that no man stands to allow himself to be outdone by another man in terms of fighting in terms of in-group membership and also attiring oneself. So I think that some of the actual the dressing of California, it comes from the actual the warring of California in terms of the indigenous people here, all who are festive and ornate in their donning of clothing, but also the conquistadors and their military culture, and then as that would come up against the native people here, and then also the military ranks here, and I think that that's where some of the dressing comes here, where dressing is very important. But another, and these things go deep because I think that some of the way that a person would look brilliant, like in say a uniform or just anything you would wear, what does it matter what someone say, man, those shoes are rocking, man, I really like those shoes. When people say they like your clothing, what they're more so saying is that they like your aura. I had that compliment once. I was walking into a store where I was at in Minnesota, and a woman said, man, I like I like your vibe. She just said that not from nowhere. She just said, man, as I was walking into a Walgreens, she was walking out, she was baffled by my clothing. The deeper thing is that all of your experiences are in your midst, all of your recent, but also your historical experiences of your life, which inform your recent experiences. They're in your midst, in your aura, in your attitude, in your hygiene, in your posture, in your gait, in your lifestyle, in your choices in conveying a vehicle, a skateboard, a bike, walking. Anything you would do is attended by your actual your momentum, and that's finer than you can see with your eyes because things that are less pure than light are revealed by light because light gives it contrast. But parts of you that are finer, that are actually fine as what's called light, because they are on the deepest sense transcendent and in essence light. They can't. So all of a person cannot be perceived by the eyes. And I think that also we have organs and or nothing in this life is singular. All this life is dual. And I think that when we're born, we have something of a twin thing of ourselves. Sometimes the exception proves the rule. So sometimes two twins manifest, but I think that all human beings have some form of a twin or some form of a life force that is attendant and proximate of them. And that might be some of how you're able to see things or perceive things before they would occur to you, is that the finer range of you, whether that's an entirely different person or mode of yourself, someone say your higher self, that might be the better view, also something of a twin of you, and maybe part of what incarnates when you have a child, why your child looks like you, that they may be some complex, transcendent form of a twin of yours in conjunction with the twin of your partner, that it may be revealed and offset by what you would don. And so if two people dress the same way, they'll look different in that clothing, not only because of their appearance, but also because of their myth and their aura and their history. And I think that's some of the profoundness of dressing, and a lot of that is to do with California itself, but the world over. Um, but I had more that I wanted to come with, but this is a lot that I've gotten off, and it's a lot of energy to produce this content. Also, while I'm in at large. I'm not currently living on the street, but I'm living near the street, and so there's a lot going on. I had a lot more of range that I want to talk about, and that I'll come back with. But I think that's enough to land right there. And so I'm not sure who has tapped into this, but I hope this is a bit of value. And I have more of this line of thought, but I think this is a good landing point, and I'll come back with more that I'm building up to the content. Peace out. My bad. Sorry for the crusty mustache, man.